Toby, unfortunately, the one tech issue we had at Learning Technologies was we lost the first few minutes of our conversation. So anyone listening to this, we're re-recording those first few questions. And then if you hear like a shift in the sound or anything like that, or a bit more background noise, we're picking back up where we left off at LT. But Toby, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm almost certain. When I got dressed this morning doing this re-record, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm wearing the same jacket. I'm not wearing the same t-shirt. I know
Yeah,
that, but the jacket is the same. So there might be some continuity. Who
yeah,
knows?
visual continuity for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, So the first question I asked you last time was around your mission and your LinkedIn bio, which is designing a better world of work for everyone. So what does a workplace that works for everyone look like in your opinion?
So a workplace that works for everyone has to be one that's designed using a human-centered approach. So I think we've all known that individual parts of a human resources or people function tend to design from a human-centered approach, whether it's recruitment, learning and development, talent and leadership, whatever, right? They all aspire to design using this human-centered approach. However, if you do true human-centered design, to funnel yourself into each of one of those kind of buckets is very, very limiting. So to design a better world of work, you have to use human-centered design, but you have to use it as part of a broader HR and people strategy that understands your customers or employees and how they interact with the workforce. And much like customer teams, right? So most organizations, pretty much every organization that sells to customers doesn't just have like one customer profile. It's the same with employees. You don't have one employee profile. It's a multifaceted organization that you work in that has lots of different types of people. And therefore you have to design for those. But the HR and people teams that I've certainly worked in and with in the past have one approach. They have a very singular approach to designing employee experience. And therefore you're just funneling all these people into the same journey. So what a workplace of the future looks like is based on human-centered design, appreciating a diverse group of people and being able to have adaptable and personalized employee experience journey maps, from beginning to end. And the beginning and end as well is kind of from when they start following your company on social media to when they stop, not from when they join your company and they leave, right? The whole employee experience is far longer and broader than we give it credit for at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, to pick up on that last point you made, I've seen you talk about it as an employee engagement or like life cycle basically. And the problem is, I think sometimes you're right, there's like a short termism or like a very narrow view of what the employee life cycle is. It's just like you say, oh, it's from the moment they start working with us to the moment they leave the company, but it's a much broader spectrum, isn't it?
Totally. And when someone leaves an organization, they have the opportunity to have a massive impact on that company, even though they don't work there. And that might be through being, a customer, that might be through referred, referred recruitment, that might be through partnerships, that might be through just advocacy and recommending, other people are customers of that place as well. So what's wholly missing is the commercial impact of that. So all of those things I mentioned there have a tangible value to the organization, but because no HR or people team measures it or necessarily targets advocacy as an outgoing metric for an employee, are kind of missing on this value. And I think talked about it a few times as someone I used to work with who used to work for a big UK supermarket about 10 years ago. And they have not worked there, like I say, for 10 years, but they still shop there. They still recommend their friends and family shop there. They still recommend their friends and family work there. And they would go and work back there within a heartbeat. Now, if we measured the commercial value that that person has added to that supermarket 10 years after leaving, you're probably knocking on the door of hundreds of thousands worth of revenue because that company treated that person so well. However, on the flip side, I do know that there's someone in almost exactly the same scenario, times a little bit different, but we're still talking about 11, 12 years post working at that large supermarket. And when I asked them the same question about what was that place like to work, they kind of go, I would never work there again. I would never recommend you work there. I don't shop there anymore. You shouldn't shop there anymore. And actually, they said that because of the last 3 months in that organization. They actually had a pretty good time up until that point, and it's only the last 3 months that really meant that they became a detractor. So for any amount of money this supermarket was making in value gained out of person A, person B actually has negative value because we've lost a customer there, we've lost revenue, we've lost advocacy, and as a result of the human resources or people strategy, it's actually it's a pretty bad thing, right? And I think you have to appreciate that treating everybody the same in the workplace isn't fit for purpose. And that's a really tangible result, right? That if you treat everyone the same, what works for one person doesn't work for another, it can have a direct impact onto the bottom line. And you've got to you have to appreciate it and measure it. If you don't appreciate it or measure it, you can kind of, as human resources and people teams have done, you can get away with it because it isn't the status quo to do that. But quite quickly, it is going to become the status quo. And if you aren't measuring it, and if you're not measuring it, you're going to be losing out. But if you are measuring it and it's bad, you've got to do something to improve it.
Yeah, you just reminded me of two things I saw recently. One is like the referral point about would you recommend someone works there speaks perfectly to that idea of it being like a longer term life cycle, because we often incentivize referral schemes for, if you know someone who's good for this role, then recommend it to us. There might be a financial incentive, but we never say to like outgoing employees that, by the way, here's a link you can use that like it tracks if you recommend someone for roles to work here in the future, even though you don't work here anymore, because maybe you have a positive experience. And that reminds me again, I saw a post the other day, someone had this really nice offboarding gift set from their employer. And then to that point, it's like, we always send like branded stuff on day one, but what about on like the final day actually in the company? Are people being sent like a nice like final touch point in terms of branded stuff or a gift or anything like that?
And on the first point you mentioned there, so Google did a bit of an experiment where I think their referral fee was something like $2,000. If you refer a successful candidate, you get $2,000, and they wanted to increase that number, the number of recruitment referrals, or successful recruitment referrals certainly, and they doubled the incentive from $2,000 to $4,000, and it didn't have any impact. So what we know from that kind of experiment is that the opportunity to recommend or refer someone who should work for that organization isn't nothing, but isn't directly linked to the amount of reward you get, because essentially you are putting your heart and head into this opportunity for a member of your network, whether it's a friend or family or ex-colleague or whatever. You're putting your own reputation on the line. So if you're willing to do that, that demonstrates a huge amount. And actually, it is nothing. It's very little to do with money. So as a measurement, we think about, if I give a gift basket to someone who's about to leave, the ENPS score that day will probably be higher than it may have been the day before. But that's because you're kind of given that sugar rush, right? But what you want to be measuring is, do people refer customers and employees here? Because that's where real advocacy sits. And I think you've got to measure both, right? But ENPS people tend to use whilst people are at an organization, not when they've left. And then the other one in terms of recruitment referrals is like, actually, are you using that as a measure of recruitment or a measure of advocacy? Because it's both.
So thinking in terms of like that designing the better workplace for everyone, is the action point just to look at a wider view of all the touch points? So like what are potentially like really early touch points? What does it look like when someone leaves the company? And then actually understanding like what you do at each of those stages and what the relationship is like.
Yeah, it's quite simple, really. So it is to have that broader view, and there are companies and teams out there that have already figured this out, and they are customer teams. They appreciate that marketing, sales, customer success, and product and service design are 4 key pillars to an effective kind of customer experience design strategy. Now, when we look at human resources or people functions, they are completely the opposite. And let's take marketing as an example. There is quite a huge skill set in people teams and human resources teams, except we call it employer brand and we call it internal communications. Both of those are actually marketing skills, but for some reason we define them as 2 different roles. We define them as 2 different things, when it's like, this is actually if you bundle those things together as a very effective marketing team that advertise the products and services your broader HR people team design, and they take it to a market which is both external employees, potential employees, and internal employees. It's like, that's marketing. It's not, and actually, if you're recruited from a marketing team, you might have some differences or more future-facing skills about what does marketing look like in a customer perspective, and how can we bring that to employee experience design. And that goes down to, like I said, product and service design. Learning development is really good at figuring problems out and designing things to solve those problems. However, they do it in such a small slither of the employee experience. It's like, how do we help people perform better?
Well, it's a pretty easy transition to take some of that thinking and those concepts into employee experience design. And once you do that, you start thinking about how you treat employees as a HR or learning team fundamentally differently. The great news is that marketing, sales, customer success, and product and service design teams already exist in the world. So you're not trying to craft new skill sets here for HR and learning. You're just taking some of that stuff from over there. And learning and development is a really interesting one, because learning and development won't exist in 5 to 10 years. Quite bluntly, it just won't. It will in larger organizations because they're too big and stubborn to change, but certainly in the smaller ones, you don't see learning and development teams in small organizations. But what that skill set will do is transition into product and service design. So by name, it will not exist, but by skill set and applying human-centered design, it definitely will.
Yeah, what's interesting actually is not all companies, although they might do it, they don't view it in this life cycle way, because think about the amount of times we try and re-engage like lost customers, or maybe someone rehires someone back into a business, or cold leads, aka you could bring in one sense the journey's over, but you're trying to re-engage all these people. So they might not call it this life cycle, and someone might not practice it, but actually you're right, there's a real nice thing happening there where unintentionally or intentionally people are viewing it as a life cycle that in many ways never ends really.
And from a tech perspective, you have to be able to manage that as well. So, re-engaging customers is a really good example. It's like a CRM, a customer relationship management tool, is absolutely great for people who sell and account manage client or customer work. And it's really good for recruiters. And then all of a sudden you get inside an organization, when you've actually got the customer or employee, you don't have a CRM. You kind of go, oh, we won't use the CRM that recruitment use now. We'll use a HR platform or a learning platform to get our people data. And it's like, but you had a really good thing over there at the very beginning. Why are we not trying to continue that thread of both the data and the customer experience or employee experience through the same platform? It kind of doesn't make sense. So yeah, it becomes a slight shift in the skill set within HR and learning, and also how you build the tech stack to appreciate that.
Yeah, to change tack slightly, I saw a great post from you the other day. You were talking about that 70% of YouTube subscribers say that influencers change and shape culture. How can companies leverage that principle internally, maybe leverage their internal influencers, get buy-in by using other people that are already engaged, for example?
There's kind of two ways. So the first one is reframing what you expect from your leaders within an organization. So typically leaders kind of earn this celebrity status, especially at the C-suite, where they're so far removed from the day-to-day and what people are doing in the organization. So any content and conversation they try and create has a lack of empathy and awareness and relevancy to the audience. So it's like, okay, so what you should really be doing is disseminating that through different people. It doesn't make sense for the CEO to put out this quite bland catch-all message, because it doesn't influence kind of culture. So what you should be doing is looking, okay, we have an audience of X amount of people. What are the common personas or behavioral archetypes that sit within that audience? And how do we talk to them most effectively? And it's finding the right people that will talk to those audiences. And generally, it won't be your senior leadership team. It will be a notable person. And this isn't necessarily by department, this is by behavior, right, and mindset. You find a notable person that speaks that same language, has that same relevancy, has that empathy with that persona, and get them to deliver that message. That's what influencers are really great at, and YouTube creators and anyone on Twitch, is they bring a context and relevancy that celebrities don't. And the same study kind of says that, celebrities on YouTube and Instagram and Twitch or whatever aren't really the most influential on culture, because they are so far removed from the day-to-day.
Celebrities become unrelatable. Yeah. That's the whole problem with celebrities. So you see it sometimes with YouTube channels, when they're like 1 to 10,000 people, like they really do have a huge influence on the people who follow them. When they get to maybe 100,000 and you're one in a much larger audience, then maybe they do get a little bit of that celebrity status. So I do think that whole point about if it's coming from someone who's seen as a celebrity in the organization, they're less relatable. And someone said a great thing to me almost like 2 years ago now: leaders are anyone wants to follow. So like you say, by behavior. So try and find those people that others naturally follow, rather than thinking the person with the biggest reach is the person who's right to deliver a message.
And that's the thing, leaders are kind of given the reach as part of the job role. It's like, you're a leader of this department, you have 100 followers. And I was like, yeah, but someone on Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok has got thousands upon hundreds of thousands of millions of followers because they've worked their ass off to make it happen. And therefore, the skill set they have to create that following is way better than a leadership skill that kind of goes, here you go, leader, have some people to follow and try and inspire them to want to follow you. It's kind of, that's not how society works. You know, even before the internet, that's not how you kind of establish a leader within a group. So it's to leverage the technological expertise that, well, we were talking earlier about esports, that these content creators on esports channels are able to create conversation, community, and content that creates a following. If you apply that to a leader or an influencer inside your company, you'd affect culture change way quicker than centralizing in internal comms, learning and development, or HR.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, you know, we were saying about the reach of the esports people is incredible. And there's actually, you know, if you don't know much about it, go and check out some of the ways people are building audiences there. In fact, actually, if they're following you, then they'll see some good content from you about this exact topic. So please do follow Toby.
Thank you very much. And not just me, but the 1J Esports who we partnered with. Like, I'm a learning and development HR guy. I am not the best person to come to you and tell you about how esports and content creators are going to change the world. That's why we've partnered with them, because like, I need to work with that talent and share that with the world of work, because there's so much intelligence in there that is going to transform everything we do at work.
And sort of the last note is, I've seen you post about some of the other companies you work with and some of the wins you've had there. And the common thing I noticed is they seem to all have a really deep understanding of their audience and their people. So, you know, how do you and also how do they kind of build that really great understanding of the people they're speaking to?
Human-centered design is the basis of everything we do. But what we came across in both mine and Emily's previous work is that when you try and apply human-centered design to a learning and development team inside an organization as it is now, it's impossible to do, because you might get the insight, but actually being able to apply design to that insight is really difficult, because you are in this bucket of learning and development. It has to be part of a broader employee experience conversation to be effective, which is why I kind of go back to learning and development won't exist in 10 years, because once you apply human-centered design and then you start thinking about, okay, the skills learning and development people have in terms of product and service design, if they use human-centered design with that, then you create things that affect the whole employee experience, the whole life cycle, and that becomes a lot better. Now, the problem with that is such a huge shift for a large organization to undertake that every time I talk to any of them, I say, look, this is what I think the future's going to be like. And they go, oh, I want it, tell me. And then I tell them and they go, it's a bit difficult though, isn't it? So the biggest wins we found is with the small to medium businesses. Anywhere between 30 to 3,000 people, they're small enough and agile enough to flex to what I've just described. Anything more than that, I'm willing to have a conversation with you, but I suggest that your team is probably too interested in the technology and the people that look after your people to move to that model. The problem is, we're at Learning Technologies, right? So I'm going to say AI because I need to say it. But AI creates a lot of efficiencies and productivity gains in people. But what no one here is talking about is like, what happens after that? Because if you can make yourself more efficient, if you can make yourself better at your job and do it quicker, well, then you're going to start getting rid of people after that. But there is this space, and everything that we've just talked about is like, if you can create the world that exists after AI has changed what you do now, that's what you need to go after. Don't go after AI now. Of course, don't throw it away, but do the stuff you're doing now, but have a keen eye on the future, because if you don't, before long, you'll have been made redundant and you won't be able to affect the change that you want to do, that all of us want to do, because we all want to do it, right? But we don't currently operate in the HR or learning and development system that enables us to have that impact.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we've been speaking about a lot is shiny new things like AI can be really attractive, but ultimately the fundamentals don't change. And like you say, if you make these shifts to the fundamental skills, setting up the right culture, setting up the right behaviors to therefore have the right output, then you might not necessarily need a particular tool to get there, but what you're setting is the right skills, the right culture, the right foundation to do it, and not rushing in.
Yeah, and I was talking to someone the other day, and I referenced in a talk the other day, there's the pandemic is a really good example. I said the pandemic is the thing that's going to change everything, and it's changed nothing. We are slowly, or quickly in some cases, reverting to type, get everyone back in the office, let's operate how we used to. That's not really good enough, because what that's demonstrated is the pandemic hasn't actually changed anything. It temporarily put a plaster over the situation. And if we're not careful, AI will just do the same. As like learning and development is a really good example. We're trying to create loads of content, AI will help us do that. Well, hang on a minute. We need to question whether that content creation was the right thing in the first place, which I think we both know it's not. So it's like design, you've got to design the system of work. And this is the other crazy thing, right? HR and learning are the departments within organizations that are going to help the rest of the organization be prepared for the future. But unfortunately and ironically, the two departments that are probably least prepared for the future than the rest of the organization. So it's a little bit hypocritical, but I'm not saying it's impossible. And like I say, it's to have the self-awareness that learning and development as a thing needs to transition into something else. Like you say, the skill set is still the same. Not say, like, it's just changing a name and changing how you work slightly to have the impact that all in our hearts, when you talk to everyone here, they want to have that impact. Being in learning and development doesn't help you do that.
Awesome. Toby, that is a great note to end on. Thank you so much for speaking today. I'll put the links where people can find you and everything you do in the show notes, and hopefully they will drop you a message and share their thoughts on what we spoke about today.
Awesome. Cheers, Gary. Appreciate it.